Hello everybody, this is Mr. Storm, and today we're going to create a very basic number guessing game. This is the first project that we're going to complete together in our HTML5 application development class. Um, Now, I must say that in order to do well in this class and in order to understand everything that we're going to talk about, it's probably a good idea that you to have completed Web Development Fundamentals 1 and 2 before taking this class. If you haven't, it might be a good idea to switch into one of those classes so you can understand the basics of everything that I'm going to talk about. Basically, I'm not going to slow down and explain what HTML is and what all the elements are that I'm writing and what JavaScript is and what a method is and a function and variables and all that stuff. I'll explain enough of it as we go so that you can pick up and keep moving. But if you haven't taken those classes, then you're probably going to be a little bit lost. But that said, we're going to create a very easy, very basic game to begin with, and we're going to kind of add on to it in the next couple of weeks, just to make sure that we understand the idea behind using JavaScript and HTML5 and linking them together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up CodeWriter so that I can, I don't want to open that document. Don't do that. All right. I'm going to create a new HTML document here. And this is basically my web page now. I have a new web page. Let's close that out. Oh, let's close that out too. Let's open a new one, new HTML5 document here. And this is a basic blank web page. And what I want to do is I actually want to create my number guessing game here. Now, as you saw in Web Development 2, in the second term when we were talking about JavaScript, most of our JavaScript and CSS are going to be put into separate files and we're going to link them to our HTML. But because this is such a simple game, I'm actually going to do it all in one page. So let's call this number guessing game. And let's go ahead and set up the HTML for our game to begin with. So in the body, I'm actually going to put a paragraph, put a paragraph element in here, and I'm going to give it the ID of output. This will allow us to change this paragraph element using JavaScript later on. And right now I'm going to put I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 100. Okay, pretty easy stuff. This is just going to be a paragraph element that is displayed on our page. I'm going to go ahead and save this file as, we'll say, index.html. And let's go ahead and open that up just to make sure that our stuff is working properly so far. And it is. So we can see I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 100. Now this is a very basic web page. I can't do anything with it. There's nothing I can click or move or drag. So we're actually going to add on to that. First of all, I want to give my user an input field. I want to give them the ability to input something into this game because I want them to be able to guess, right? So I'm going to give them an input, and I actually will give the input an ID of input. So again, we can tie our JavaScript to this element later on. It's going to be an input type of text so that they can type some stuff, and I'm going to put some placeholder text in here as well so they know what to do. Enter your guess. Okay. And then the last thing I want to put on the page is a button. And the button's going to be pretty easy. I'm just going to write the name, or I'm going to write the word guess inside the button. So at this point, we have our user interface established and set up for this game. So all we have to do, let's double check to make sure everything looks good. Yep, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 100. I can enter my number and hit the guess button, but it doesn't do anything. That's where the JavaScript comes in so we can build the game logic. So far the game looks good. Now we actually want to build the logic. So we're going to do that below our HTML5 elements. We're going to create a script section, and it's going to be of type text/JavaScript. Okay. And inside the script section is where we're going to put all of the code that we're going to write in order to handle this game. So let's think about what we actually need. First of all, we need a couple of variables. So let's set a variable section here. And what variables do we need? Well, we need mystery number, which is going to be the number that the game comes up with on its own. So I'm going to set var mystery number. I'm going to set that equal to 50. And then we need a player guess number, something that the player will enter into our code or into that text field. And when we hit the button, it'll actually take that player guess number and compare it with the mystery number. That's pretty easy, right? And we're going to set that equal to 0 right now so that your player doesn't automatically win the game as soon as the game loads. We want them to do something. All right, now next we need to actually initialize our input and output fields. Remember up here we did the ID equals output and ID equals input. Well, we need to tie some JavaScript code to those elements so that we can actually manipulate what goes inside the paragraph and manipulate what we get from the input element here. So let's do that here. Let's the input and output fields. There we go. All right, so the input and output fields. And what we want to do is we want to create new variables. I'm going to create one called var input, and that's going to be equal to document.query selector because I'm looking for that specific ID that I set up in the HTML section of the code. And that selector is going to be input. Pretty easy stuff. So now I have a new variable called input, and it's tied to the query selector input up here, or sorry, input up here. Then I'm going to do the same thing with output. Var output equals document dot query selector. Yeah. And output. And that's going to do the same thing here. So we're going to use this query selector output to tie our new variable called output to that paragraph element up there on the page. Perfect. Now we want to set up our button so that our button actually does what we want it to do when we click it, right? And so the button is going to be called var, or the way we're going to set this up is var, and we'll create a new variable called button, and that button is going to be document.query selector. And instead of tying it to the hashtag, we're just going to tie it to button itself. Notice there's no hashtag in front of it. There's no pound sign because we're not tying it to an ID. We're just tying it to the object button. Now, if we had more buttons on the page, obviously we would want to tie it to the ID itself, but we're going to just tie it to the button here. Okay, so now we have a variable called button, and it's tied to the appropriate HTML5 object. Now what we want to do is we want to set the button style, and essentially the cursor, what we want the cursor to turn into whenever we hover over it, and we're going to set it to pointer. And then the last thing we want to do with this button is set add an event listener. So event listeners are methods that essentially will wait for something to happen. We can set what we want that thing that it's waiting for is, and then we can set what we want it to actually do when it is clicked, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to set add event listener, and it's important that you make sure, everything's typed properly, right? Just like everything with JavaScript code, we want to make sure it's all properly set up. And that add event listener, it's going to listen for a click, which means, I click the button, I click my mouse on the button. And then it's going to be a click handler, or it's going to call the function click handler, and we will set its behavior to false. All right, so now we need to create a new function called click handler that will run whenever the button is clicked. And what do we want this thing to do? Well, I'm going to very quickly, just so I can test all the stuff that I've done, I'm going to set output dot inner HTML to be equal to you just clicked the button. And essentially what I'm doing here is I'm actually just saying, hey, this output variable that we created up here, which is tied to this paragraph element, I actually want to just replace the inner HTML code of this paragraph element to be you just click the button. So instead of saying I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 100, it's actually going to change to you just click the button. So let's go ahead and save this and test it out to see if it's actually working. So I'll refresh my page, and when I click it, it's going to change that text to you just click the button. So now we've given some we've given our user some ability to interact with the page that we've developed. So let's actually go in here and create the game logic in order for this game to work. So let's think about it. What do we need to determine to figure out what actually happens? So let's do this. What we want to do is, first of all, we need to get the player's guess. So we need to figure out what the player typed into this input element and see what it is and all that stuff. So what we're going to do is set the player guess variable to be equal to that input value. But we need to do something important first. This input is going to enter whatever we type into this input is going to come in as a string variable. We don't want it as a string, we want to set it as an integer. So we need to parse that by doing parse int, and then whatever we want to parse would be the input dot value, the value of that input. So now we have something entered into the player guess variable. And now that we have player guess and we have the mystery number, now we can start comparing those two to see if everything worked out. So let's say if player guess equals mystery number, then we will change the output dot inner HTML to be equal to U1, right? So now if we enter 50 and we hit the button, then it should change the text on the screen to U1. So let's save that and go back to our page, refresh it here, and type in 50 and hit guess. Hey, we just won the game, right? Because we knew what the number was. Perfect. Let's go back and let's actually add in some context or some other things that could happen. Your user isn't going to win the game every time. They're going to have to guess a couple of times. So let's say else if player guess is greater than mystery number, then we will set it to output dot inner HTML. Your guess is too high, right? And we can also do if it's too low. But at this point, all we have to do is create an else, because every other number they enter is going to be lower because it's not equal, it's not greater than, so it automatically has to be lower. So then we can just do output.inner HTML equals your guess is too low. Okay. Now at this point we have a functioning game. Let's go ahead and test it out and make sure the game actually works properly. So I'm going to enter a low guess. Let's say 2. Your guess is too low. All right, let's try 99. Your guess is too high. Let's try 50. Your guess, or you win. Let's try to enter in a word. Your guess is too low. Now, so that's a problem that we have, right? I can enter in whatever I want into this text field. It doesn't always have to be a number. It doesn't have to be whatever. Now, the reason why it said my guess was too low whenever I entered in that word was because whenever we're parsing our integers from a string, if it's not an actual integer that the parse can recognize, it'll turn it into 0. So it's just the same as me guessing 0. Also, if my guess is too low and I enter another low guess and click guess, it looks like my game's not doing anything. So there are a couple problems we need to fix, but at this point we actually have a fully functioning game that we can play. So in the next couple of weeks, we're actually going to spend some time in this game playing around with JavaScript and HTML. We're going to play around with this code and figure out how to build this out and to be an even better game. And we'll spend some more time going over everything that we've done in this first little project. But so far, we actually, what is it, the second week of the class, and we already have a playable game, a functional game, an application that we can send our friends to our website if we post this to a website and have them actually play the game. So right now, this is great, right? So I'm going to cut it there. I'm going to let you play around with it, see what additions and changes and improvements you can make to this system. But I will let you play around with it. Thank you for paying attention, and I will see you next time.